The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last week, I reminded you about Pastor Kevin Swanson introducing Ted Cruz at some religious lunacy event and then talking about how he thinks all gay people should be killed. Ted Cruz hasn't commented on this. Ted Cruz hasn't distanced himself from Kevin Swanson. We've heard nothing from Ted Cruz about this obvious relationship where it's at least acceptable to show up at an event and be introduced by this lunatic who thinks all gay people should be killed. We now have learned about an even more direct connection to a Cruz associate who wants to ban homosexuality, whatever that means. I don't know how you ban that, but okay. It's like saying, I want to ban people who are born with blue eyes. I mean, you could artificially change their eyes, but you can't really ban the people, right? Terrible example, of course, because you can't really change your sexual orientation. But the point being, I don't know how you ban something that just exists. Republican Michigan State Representative Gary Glenn, who's a legislative co-chair for Ted Cruz's campaign, believes that being gay should be criminal. During a 2011 interview, he was asked if he supported criminalizing homosexuality, and he said, quote, "The short answer to your question is yes, we believe that states should be free to regulate and prohibit behavior that's a violation of community standards and a proven threat to public health and safety, including, as most of the United States did throughout its history, homosexual behavior." Okay, so then he's specifically saying, make homosexual behavior illegal. And we know about sodomy laws, which, by the way, are unconstitutional, and we've heard about these tactics. You will probably not be surprised to hear that Glenn also serves as the president of the American Family Association of Michigan, a known anti-gay hate group. And last year, Glenn spoke out against a Planet Fitness policy, which resulted, you remember this story, Lewis, we covered it. A Midland, Michigan woman had her membership canceled at Planet Fitness, a gym, after she spent several days complaining about a transgender woman in the women's locker room. So in a statement announcing Glenn's status as a legislative co-chair of his campaign, Cruz said he was, quote, thrilled to announce the addition of such outstanding conservative legislators to our Michigan leadership team. I would love to just get Ted Cruz on record and say, listen, your legislative co-chair, right? Your legislative co-chair in Michigan thinks homosexuality should be criminalized. Do you denounce your legislative co-chair's position on the criminalization of homosexuality? Not a question he's been asked.
No, and I predict that unless he appears on our program, no one is going to ask. But yeah, this is the kind of friends Ted Cruz has.
We have hundreds of years in hundreds of places where being gay was a crime because people were too ignorant to get it, that we're born with our gender preferences, right? Our sexual orientation. And when we hear someone like Glenn say, quote, "We believe that states should be free to regulate and prohibit behavior that's a violation of community standards and a proven threat to public health and safety," my mind goes not to banning homosexuality or making it a crime. Mine goes to air and water regulations, placing bans on fracking, drilling, legislation banning certain types of firearms and ammunitions that are a threat to communities. But if you try to do any of those things, Lewis, I am sure that the so-called freedom-loving conservative would say, whoa, that's taking freedom away.
Yeah, I've actually heard from Gary Glenn's chief of staff that he's planning on banning happy next.
Right.
It's there's something they're working on.
Ted Cruz's associations with these right-wing extremists are very, very disturbing.
It's disturbing, I guess. I mean, we've been talking about individuals like this for years. It's disturbing that Ted Cruz won't distance himself from these freaks. Well, like, you know what? He is one of these freaks. That's the problem.
He believes he was anointed by God to be president in order to bring about the second coming of Christ. He's in line with these guys. His views are no crazier than this guy, Glenn guy, who wants homosexuality criminalized.
Yeah, look, if God wanted Ted Cruz to win, God would make sure that things weren't coming out of Ted Cruz's mouth during debates, okay?
Walmart is facing a perfect storm that is hurting its sales growth. According to an analysis by Moody's, Walmart's own customers are too broke to shop. The core customers of Walmart are struggling with flat income levels, and they're not able to save money because the lower fuel prices are not because of the flat wages and other expenses. Even though there are lower fuel prices, which often are a sort of big determining factor in the disposable income of lower income individuals, they are not having extra money that might otherwise be spent at Walmart. The business at Walmart is also under pressure from deflation in some key product categories, including food, and a strong dollar abroad is also a problem here. Walmart said last month that it is expecting no sales growth whatsoever in the coming fiscal year, which in a sense, Lewis, is a decrease in sales when you do inflation adjustments. I mean, Walmart really closing a number of stores, still a huge and very profitable business, but relatively speaking, having some problems. And now even its own customers don't have the money they need to shop there.
Mm-hmm. And I think that if they were to pay their employees more, it would be a boost in business for them.
They've actually been investing in that. I mean, they've increased the minimum wage that they pay employees.
But they're not going all in, right? I
No.
mean, what they're doing is they're kind of testing the waters,
right?
Seeing if there's an increase with their slight increase they're giving their employees.
No doubt.
And I hope they find out that that there actually is an increase.
We have a piece that is almost finished that we've been working on. We sort of offhandedly mentioned about a month and a half ago in a piece about Walmart that Walmart creates customers from employees by paying their employees poorly. They make a situation where their own employees are going to say, well, I should go to Walmart because that's where stuff is cheap. I can't really afford anything else. And a former Walmart employee wrote to us about this, and we've been working with him and with segment producer and intern Sam Miller on a really great piece exposing how Walmart turns employees, creates customers from their employees. And the entire ecosystem is one that really depends on people in lower income brackets being able to afford going there. And this is just an incredible change. And we've seen the stock price at Walmart decrease drastically. Of course, stocks are disproportionately held by the rich. So as a result of poor people not having enough money to shop at Walmart, not enough money is being distributed to the rich via increases to the stock price. It's an amazing world we live in, isn't it?
It really is, yeah. So interesting time for Walmart. I hope their little wages experiment is fruitful because, of course, I want their employees to get paid a living wage ultimately.
Last time you shopped at Walmart, do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, probably not too long ago.
Ooh.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's I think there's one kind of near the studio, right?
Mm-hmm. Sort of.
And if
I
I
wouldn't know, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I need something that they have, it's just the quickest and easiest place for me to get, especially as someone who doesn't have a car.
Now, what about the Target? I don't know where the Walmart is, but I assume it's close to the Target. Why not go to the Target, which, as we know, is the slightly less bad alternative to Walmart?
Maybe that's where is it next to the Stop and Shop?
Maybe.
Okay. Well, maybe it's a Target. You know, I really sometimes can't even tell the difference between the two, except for the colors. Whichever one is right there next to the Stop and Shop, that's the one I go to.
Okay, so maybe Lewis hasn't been to Walmart. Yeah, the last time I went to Walmart, it was something from the hardware store, some kind of cleaning solution.
Yeah. Where are you going to get that?
I mean, I should have gone either to the local hardware store or to Target, but at the time it was sort of, it might have been related to a leak, honestly, or maybe even like when I had a mouse problem at another apartment, and I needed to get something right away. And I went to Walmart. But other than that, and that was a couple of years ago, prior to that, I think it's been eight years or more since I've shopped at Walmart. And I plan on not going back. And I know someday I may find myself in a part of the country where I practically have no choice but to go to Walmart. I have to hope that particular day I don't need anything they carry, I guess.
Okay. Well, there's a little applause for Dave. Congratulations on your long streak there.
We have a fantastic program for you today and a fantastic bonus show where I will rant about New York City's new $4 billion train station and a lot of different things. Sign up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership. And of course, follow me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at dpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
As you know, The David Pakman Show is made possible by viewers and listeners of our show through something we call the membership program. Tim Brick is today's new member of the day. You can join Tim at davidpakman.com/membership. Get all the great member benefits. You know all about it. It's time to sign up if you want to support alternatives to corporate media. 7 years ago this week, President Obama lifted a ban on embryonic stem cell research. So what has happened in the field in the 7 years since the ban was lifted? This year, we learned that university embryonic stem cell research has seen continued growth. University of Michigan's program has advanced exponentially over recent years. They're working on treating conditions including diabetes and Alzheimer's and types of cancer. Artificial embryonic stem cells have also received a safety okay just a couple of weeks ago. So this is a very long process that will continue. But here's the most interesting thing I found out, Lewis, about looking at the 7 years of embryonic stem cell research since President Obama lifted the ban. Being able to do embryonic stem cell research on actual, non-viable, but actual human embryos has let us figure out that we don't even need to use actual embryonic stem cells for all forms of research. In other words, doing the research on the actual embryonic stem cells has taught us that we can use artificial embryonic stem cells and do a ton of research with that. So this is one of those interesting cases where, by virtue of making something that was controversial for some legal, we figured out we actually don't need to do it as much as we might have originally thought.
Yeah, a nice development. And so, in other words, if the religious zealots had their way, there's just the idea that making practices like this illegal would be a bad idea, because then those certain people will go out of their way to break the law and do things immorally.
Correct.
To conduct this research and to conduct these experiments. So I think this is a perfect example of why, yes, this research should be allowed to happen.
And this is totally separate from the potential actual medical advancements that we would figure out. 2 new studies describe the developments that will likely enable medical researchers to skip stem cells in medical treatments that were once thought to be impossible without them. We just need to be doing this, and I'm glad we are. And fortunately, this hasn't really been a topic of conversation during the presidential race, Lewis, and no real indication that whoever gets into office, really we're talking about Republicans, is going to target embryonic stem cell research, at least not right away.
No, yeah, not right away. I mean, it's just become a non-issue. No one is talking about it, and I really doubt it will come up during the general election. But if it does, we can probably count on, I guess, the Republican nominee bashing it.
Unless it's Trump. I have a feeling Trump wouldn't be opposed to embryonic stem cell research.
I don't think he's opposed to it at all.
You think he might say
he might say, yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, interesting. Fortunately, so far, the research continues, and that is really good news. 3 years ago this week, Kansas Republicans cut college aid to pay for tax cuts. We've been following this story of Kansas Republicans, including at the forefront, Governor Sam Brownback, who have cut college aid for the poor to pay for tax breaks. We wondered how this would work, and we now know it has been an unmitigated disaster. Sam Brownback raised taxes on the poor to pay for tax cuts for the rich, threatened to defund the judiciary if it ruled against him on an issue related to school funding. Then he was cheerleading the tax cuts that destroyed his state. And just last week, Governor Sam Brownback cut higher education as the Kansas tax receipts are falling short of expenditures because of the tax cuts for the rich. The Kansas economy, Lewis, has completely fallen apart under Sam Brownback. It is a terrible place to be doing business. It is a terrible place to be getting a public school education. It is not doing well in healthcare. It's not doing well in social services. It has had real repercussions. Yet we don't hear, well, we heard some Republicans in Kansas who figured this out, but the Republican Party, by and large, still supports this broader supply-side taxation policy.
Yes, I guess they could probably try to come up with excuses why that this one situation is just anecdotal, and they won't point to it. They'll tell us not to believe it. I think it's a perfect example, and unfortunately, they've pulled the wool over the eyes of their constituents.
Yeah.
Everyone buys this stuff, and they keep trying to push for it.
It has had some repercussions. More than 100 Republicans endorsed the Democratic challenger against Republican Governor Sam Brownback in Kansas, although he was ultimately reelected by a small margin. So one of the really, really horrible Republican governors. Just imagine, I mean, I wonder if Sam Brownback at night sits there and says, wow, I destroyed my state. I mean, I really, really destroyed my state. Or if he just rationalizes it away.
If I had to guess, I would say that he actually doesn't care about anyone other than the rich people he's trying to make sure stay rich or get richer. I have the feeling that's exactly the type of guy this is.
That's the same feeling a lot of lower and middle class Americans in Kansas have about their governor, Sam Brownback. Just a total and utter disaster. 2 years ago this week, Fox host Stuart Varney was outraged that the poor were still being fed in spite of food stamp cuts. This is a clip I'm going to play for you from a couple of years ago. It's a good one, and then we'll talk about what's happened since.
Dollars extra for food stamps. This completely negates, almost entirely negates, the cuts that Congress imposed. It shows you, once you've got a program, you can never get rid of it, and it's very difficult to cut. And what's really going on here is the government is buying votes. They're churning out the food stamps in return for votes. That's what's happening.
He was saying, Lewis, you know, we cut food stamps, and still the government has figured out a way to let poor people have food, and that really made him angry, didn't it?
I love that whole buying votes concept. It's not just with food stamps, it's with Obamacare, and I think people even talked about George Bush's cell phone program as Obama trying to buy
and the Obama phones, too.
Yeah, and
which was I see what you're saying. It was actually George W. Bush's program.
Yeah. And so that is really, really crazy fear mongering and rhetoric right there.
And it hasn't stopped.
No, it hasn't stopped. I mean, luckily Varney doesn't get much airtime.
Yeah, he after Pope Francis addressed climate change while speaking at the White House some months ago. Stuart Varney said that the entire thing is nonsense and that he is, quote, shocked that the Pope spent nearly 20 minutes talking about saving our planet. That was really bad for him. And then just a couple of weeks ago, I had the clip of Stuart Varney visibly shocked that the Navy SEAL he invited on his program wasn't sexist, saying that it would be fine for women to serve in the military and combat roles, assuming that they can meet the requirements for that position. So Stuart Varney just really strikes me as a guy who is just not a very good person, or at least he doesn't play a particularly good person on Fox News.
Well, to me, he's kind of like Nancy Grace. They're at this point, they are relics, and they are stuck in the past, seemingly a past that they're even too young to be a part of somehow. But to me, that's what they are.
And to put the cherry on top, Stuart Varney also claimed that the good jobs numbers under President Obama were a conspiracy. Apparently, the jobs numbers under Bush were totally believable and fine. So interesting double standard there. Stuart Varney, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 6 months ago, 2 weeks ago, the same tired rhetoric that it appears as though the Fox News audience, by and large, still really likes. We'll take a break. Talk to us on Facebook about these stories or anything else that's on your mind. Facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
For today's classic interview, we go back to November of 2012, just after the re-election of President Barack Obama. I was joined by a guy named Craig Smith, who was very, very worried about the economic prospects of the United States in a second President Obama term. We had a conversation. We've had more than one conversation since. As you will note in this interview, I was completely skeptical of everything Craig Smith was telling me about what would happen to the economy. And the question I put to you as we review this classic interview from 2012 is, were Craig Smith's predictions correct, or were they embarrassingly and utterly wrong? Craig Smith will go back to November of 2012. Joining me is Craig Smith. He is the chairman of Swiss America, author of the new book, The Great Debasement, and you can find out more at SwissAmerica.com. Craig, I was just reading some of your notes that were sent to me that you say a second President Obama term is going to be bad for the economy. Make the case for why.
Well, because we're not seeing any changes, David. We did not have a liquidity problem in 2009, 2010, 2011. We had a confidence problem. Most businesses are sitting on record reserves right now, but are very fearful to invest them in the market because we don't know what's going to happen next in Washington. And just by way of history, we all probably remember in 2010, when we passed the stimulus and we passed Obamacare and nobody knew what was in the bill. Then 2011, we had the big fight to raise the debt ceiling. That's where we came up with the sequester and all. Everybody was terrified that we were going to go off the cliff at that moment. And now today we're dealing with the fiscal cliff again, and Mr. Obama is very intransigent about raising taxes on the top 2% Americans, and the Republicans are intransigent trying to stop him. So we have a confidence problem, David. When you're running a business and you have thousands of pages of healthcare bills to go through to see how it will affect your business, when you have regulations coming out of Dodd-Frank that are unprecedented, along with Basel III changes that are coming for reserve requirements, how does a businessman plan for that, David? It's so difficult to do it. So we have a confidence problem, and I don't think that confidence problem is going to be changed by another 4 years of the Obama administration. We argue that there's been a 25% drag on the economy due to Mr. Obama, and not due to him personally, just the fact that he is following a failed ideology that's never worked economically throughout the world. So
talk about that.
Changing.
Let's talk about that specifically. What has he done in the first 4 years that have created this 25% drag?
Well, let's give a perfect example. The first year he took office, 2009, he said, we are not going to allow the Bush tax cuts to be extended. By the last month of 2009, going into 2010, he, with his own words, said the economy's too weak to not extend them, so he extended the Bush tax cuts, but he said that's it. Okay, well, that's good. That's good plan. At least we wouldn't have gone back into a recession. Now, we have a softer economy today, David, than we had in December of 2009. And he's saying, well, I'm not going to extend them this time. We're going to definitely let them expire. He says he wants to give confidence to the middle class. That's wonderful by not increasing their taxes. But you're not giving confidence to corporations and wealthy people who have their money invested in small businesses to know what's going to happen with their taxes. So every time you create an uncertainty like that, investment and markets hate uncertainty, and we're going to continue to have that uncertainty, David.
Well, I don't know about that, because let's talk about the minutia there a little bit. If you do increase taxes on the wealthiest Americans, we're not talking about the corporate tax rate here. We're talking about the top marginal income tax on the wealthiest Americans. That's not going to have a negative effect on the economy, because those are people that are they're still going to be able to afford the same houses, the same cars. They're not going to buy any less food, so on and so forth. So I actually agree that separating the Bush tax cuts as one large thing into the tax cuts for the richest people and the middle class tax cut makes sense, because the middle class tax cut will be stimulative. That money will be spent. The rich will save that money.
Well, let's analyze that. First off, 54% of people that make over $200,000 a year are filing their taxes as small businesses, as private individuals. That's how I did it 30 years ago when I started my firm. So let's make sure that we're not just talking about rich. You're absolutely right. Rich people are not going to be affected by a 4% increase in their taxes. Quite frankly, it's going to be irrelevant to them.
Exactly.
But it's going to mean less money in their private pockets that, as you say, could be saved, which goes into banks, that is allowed to be lent out to create an economy.
Okay, let's stop there, though. Let's stop there for a second. We have to stop there for a second, though, because we have to compare what is the stimulative effect of a rich person putting that money in the bank and then the jobs that creates in banking versus, for example, and I know a lot of people don't like this example, food stamps, which is known to have an exponentially higher multiplier effect, because that money is absolutely going to be spent. That is then goes to a supermarket, that goes to the supplier, so on and so forth. So the stimulative effect is way lower of the savings.
Wait a minute, David, you've fallen into the typical misunderstanding of food stamps that was presented by Nancy Pelosi. Okay, she said those people spend it right away. You act as though this money is coming from somewhere. We have to borrow that money, David. If you raise taxes on the rich 100%. You're still not going to have enough money to make everything work. But let's say we do it for 4% and it generates $80 billion. Okay, we're now spending between food stamps, Title VIII, and Medicaid $1 trillion a year, David. So will it have any negative impact on the market? I believe it will. One thing I can assure you, it will have no positive impact on the market. Let's talk about what could have a positive impact. Let's put taxes to the side for a minute.
Yeah.
Let's just say you're right. And I'll stipulate that we can raise taxes on the wealthy. Okay, do it for 5 years so there's certainty. Now at the same time say we're going to cut entitlement spending, not against the baseline, but real cuts, meaning if we spent $1 trillion this year, we're only going to spend $900 billion next year, with legitimate cuts and hold them for 5 years. Then say you are going to suspend the unknown regulations that are coming from Obamacare, which now Denny's is going to be charging a 5% surtax on each bill that they have and putting people in a part-time status so they don't have to pay them benefits.
Yeah, but that's the same Papa John's pizza nonsense. The reality is that business hiring really depends on demand, and demand will be stimulated by middle and lower income people being able to afford your product. So the idea, the simple economic concept of marginal revenue tells us that you would make hiring decisions based on supply and demand from your customers. This is where I feel people are getting totally mixed up.
Okay, but David, fair enough. If you go to a college, that's what you're going to read in a textbook. I started this company 31 years ago with $50 out of the bedroom of my home. We now bill $250 million a year. So I think I have a little experience in how you create demand. You don't have to wait for demand to come. You can go out and create the demand.
Okay.
And that's the problem. We have this belief, David, that there's only one pie. And
so then why doesn't Denny's create more demand, regardless of what the government does?
Because they don't know what their costs are going to be on Obamacare. They don't know if tomorrow the FDA is going to come out with a new regulation that turns around and says that they're not going to be able to serve fatty foods or salty foods or 16-ounce drinks. I mean, David, all those regulations have an effect. And look, I'm not blaming all this on Mr. Obama.
Let's take a step back then, because I want to step back from Obama just for a second, because a lot of times, a lot of the arguments you're making are made specifically when it's Democrats in office. And I ran some numbers, and I saw that stock market returns are so much higher over the last 80 years when we've had Democratic presidents than when we've had Republican presidents. Domestic industrial production has increased significantly every time there's a Democratic president and has actually decreased slightly when we have Republican presidents. On 11 of 12 economic indicators, the economy does far better under Democratic than Republican presidents.
Whoa. You just made a terrible mistake.
Okay.
You said the stock market did better. The stock market is not the economy, David.
I understand. I'm giving you a there's a number of indicators here. That's one of 12.
Okay, you have production. That doesn't trickle down always to profit. Many
okay,
corporations...
so let's keep going though. Growth in personal disposable income after taxes. Growth 2.92% annualized under Democratic presidents, 0.53% under Republicans. Every indicator,
I guess you're
Craig,
leaving out the last
indicator.
4 years then, because under the last 4 years, the average American's income middle class has gone down $4,300. So apparently you're conveniently leaving out the last 4 years.
I'm including them. We're averaging this out over the last 80 years. And remember, President Obama was trying to recover from a horrible economic situation left to him by George W. Bush.
Oh, yes, horrible. No worse than what Reagan inherited, and Reagan was well on our way to growth right now. Yes, he increased deficits, but so did Mr. Obama. He took us up from 10 trillion to 16 trillion. And again, look, I'm not blaming Mr. Obama. Let me make something very clear, David, because I think you and I agree on more than we disagree.
Maybe.
George Bush, while he kept this country safe, was a horrible president from a fiscal responsibility standpoint.
Absolutely.
He never had the guts to take a veto pen out and say, no, I'm not going to allow that spending to occur.
Yeah.
So you're not going to find a fiscal fan of George Bush in this fella here.
Okay.
But I can tell you that whether it was under John F. Kennedy or whether it was under Ronald Reagan or quite frankly, whether it was under the first few years of George Bush, tax cuts work. We might not like the net effects of them, but they work. We don't have an income problem in Washington, D.C. David, we have a spending problem. Everybody doesn't want to talk about the 900-pound gorilla in the room, and that's entitlements. And look, you and I would agree on this. Is it fair to say to a Social Security person that's paid in money every year that they're going to have their benefits cut? Of course not. They've paid that money in, correct?
Yeah.
But people paid their money into Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff was a crook. He stole the money. He's
Well,
in
we're
jail.
getting a little bit into the weeds here. We're getting a little bit. This is a long discussion.
Into consideration,
It's a
David.
long discussion, and I apologize. We don't have more time. The last number I want to leave you with, Craig, is this: growth of corporate after-tax profit, meaning it takes into consideration the so-called high taxes under Democrats. 4.53% annualized growth of corporate after-tax profit under Democrats, an 11.6% decrease annualized of after-tax profit under Republicans.
Well,
we've got to look at the numbers, Craig. We've got to be aware of them.
David. Okay, let's take a bigger window then. Let's go over the last 150 years and run those numbers, and we can distort the numbers. But what always matters, the numbers don't matter.
Oh, they don't.
How is the average American being affected, David?
Well, that's what the numbers
tell
tell us. How can we say the numbers don't matter?
The
numbers are all that matters.
David, then Mr. Obama should have won in a landslide instead of a very close election if he's done such a magnificent job running the economy.
He did. He won by more than 100 electoral votes. He won every minority group. He won women 55 to 45.
He won by 2%, David.
Oh, come on, Craig. He won he won by way more than George W. Bush did in 2004.
Wait a minute. Hold on a minute now. Mr. Obama got less votes in 2012 than he got in 2008, and Mr. Romney got less votes in 2012 than Mr. McCain got in 2008. Okay, so let's not kid ourselves. Why didn't we go to a fully Democratic Congress then?
Because of gerrymandering and redistricting. We know why.
Okay.
You don't like my answers, Craig, but I have answers. That's the thing.
David, you see everything politically, and I can tell you this, okay? Good politics make bad economics, and good economics make bad politics.
We've got to look at the numbers.
Whether we want to deal with economics or politics. We have a financial mess, not just because of Mr. Obama.
We're having, and Craig, I don't mean, your mic is cutting in and out, and we've reached the end of our time. So we'll have you back. I know there's more to discuss. I want to tell people, if they want a free copy of your new book, The Great Debasement, just call 800-289-2646. You'll send them out a free copy. Craig Smith, Chairman of Swiss America. Thanks as always, Craig.
David, I appreciate you doing your homework. You're a very well-prepared host, and I look forward to future dialogue.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Time to answer audience questions. First one today is from Emma. Emma says, what specific point in history would you like to live in if given the choice, and where? So I guess, if given the choice to live at another point in time, I would want to see the future, Lewis, or the very, very far past. But since Emma said what specific point in history, let's work with that. Where would you want to go back to?
This is a really, really difficult question. But what I would like to see is, I know living in these periods of time is really not ideal.
No.
So I guess I kind of have to throw out the quality of life aspect of this whole thing.
Sure, just to observe.
Just to observe, I think ancient Egypt would be fascinating. And the capitals, the giant cities of ancient civilizations like the Assyrians, I would just like to see how these cities functioned and what life was like there on a daily basis. I think that would be incredible.
That is interesting to me, but I would go back further. I would really want to be there, for example, when humans first figured out how to control and use fire, right? I mean, imagine observing that take place and what that was like. And of course, it seems that we know that initially humans came across wildfires and sort of that's how they started getting the idea of using fire and then figured out how to create them themselves. That would be absolutely fascinating. For me, it seems it would be interesting to go further back where we don't really even have written record.
Well, I think while that would be interesting, I think there would be a lot more to learn about the not so distant past.
Really?
Yes, because, there was just more going on. There were more developments. There was more happening socially. There was more happening agriculturally. There was more happening. I mean, we just developed so much at that point.
Yep.
And just to compare how these ancient civilizations functioned, learn things that we might not have learned about there's so much has been lost. I think that would be probably an even better learning experience.
Would you have curiosity about being on the shores of what is now the United States of America when the first European settlers arrived and seeing what actually was the reaction from the natives that were in what now is the United States?
Oh yeah, that would be quite interesting. Yeah, I wish that that we had better recorded history from the Native Americans.
Right. Because as we know, the winners write the history books. If you get killed, you don't usually get to write the history books.
That is sad but true. Yeah.
All right. Peter wrote in saying, would you say that antidepressants make you a different person with a different personality? And is it right for them to do that? Along the same lines, are you a different person when you are drunk versus sober? Sort of different questions, right? And I know many people who have taken antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs, SSRIs, whatever. Nobody has told me that they feel like they are different people, right? That's never something that I've ever heard anybody say. What they do say is, this sort of takes me out of being hindered by something that I consider to be not like me and allows me to just be more like the me I want to be. So that's a totally different way of understanding it. Now, you might say, well, if somebody is just clinically depressed or naturally anxious, to whatever extent somebody can be naturally anxious, right, considering nature and nurture, then the antidepressants or the anti-anxiety pills could make you a, quote, different person, or at least change some of your the way you feel you need to act. But in speaking to people I've spoken to, nobody has said they really feel like they're just different people when they take those drugs. They feel like they are able to just function in a way that is more in line with who they consider themselves to be or want to be.
I have heard people say they feel like a different person when they're on them, but it's different. It's not so much you feel like a different person in the way you view the world and the way you think.
Right, you're not going to become a religious nut if normally you're an atheist because you're on Zoloft or whatever.
Right, exactly. But they do say, I feel like a different person because I feel like this medication has turned me into a zombie. I feel like this medication is slowing me down.
Interesting.
So in that way, yes. But in the ultimate sense, no. I don't think it turns you into a different personality type.
So part two of the question from Peter was, is it right for antidepressants to turn you into a different person? Well, what's right or not, I mean, we just had a disagreement sort of over whether it turns you into a different person anyway. So I don't know that I really even have an answer for, is it right?
Well, I think I can answer this question in a way, and I would say that it is very important to have these medications because these medications do save people's lives. And while it works much better for some than it does for others,
right,
I don't think this is something that we should be getting rid of. I mean, right, ultimately, most people are going to have the free will here and decide whether or not they want to take this stuff.
Most people will.
Yeah.
So let's get to the last part, which I think is also interesting. What about, along the same lines, are you a different person when you were drunk versus sober? I believe that when you were drunk, you were not a different person. And we've heard, for example, when Mel Gibson was drunk, all of a sudden he had crazy things to say about Jews, and he wanted us to believe that it was just because of the drinking. I do not buy that at all, Lewis. It is true, however, that if you are sort of predetermined to get physically, if you're predetermined, if you have a tendency to become violent when confronted, for example, there's no doubt that sober, 1 in a million situations might get you to that point, and drunk, 1 in 1,000 situations might get you to that point. But I don't believe that people are fundamentally different when they're drinking, particularly when it comes to being disinhibited and saying things. I think, if anything, they're more likely to say the things they actually think. And with the Mel Gibson stuff and the Jews and are you Jewish and Jews control this and that, the idea that those thoughts never cross his mind when he's not drinking, but all of a sudden he drinks, and who knows from where it comes from, the guy just is really suspicious of Jews.
Yeah. Vino veritas.
Right.
I think it's clear to me that alcohol is a disinhibitor, and so I don't think you turn into a different person. I mean, you could be at the bar, and there's some guy sitting next to you. The guy hasn't had anything to drink yet, and he wants to talk to you about politics. Now, maybe after 8 drinks, this guy just wants to bash your head in. But I think even after 0 or no drinks, somewhere in the back of this guy's mind, he's probably thinking, I could definitely beat this guy up. Or maybe I'd like to. So I think alcohol is a disinhibitor. I don't think you're a different person when you drink. I think the truth comes out when you
Now, what
drink.
about an example where you say, okay, I have significant social anxiety and I'm very shy, but if I have 4 drinks, all of a sudden I no longer feel anxious and I'm really, really outgoing in a bar and talk to people. I would question whether that's really a different person. You're still a socially anxious and shy person who is acting in a different way because you are a drunk and socially anxious and shy person, right? I mean, the idea of it's a different person is what I totally reject. You can change your behavior as a result of substances, situations, therapy, whatever. But fundamentally, you're still the same person who is a socially anxious person who, when sober, acts one way, and when drunk, acts a different way. And it's actually quite common that socially anxious people act a particular way when they do drink. It doesn't mean they're not socially anxious anymore.
Yeah, and let's not take anything away from people who decide to stop drinking
Right.
because of the way it affects them.
Of course.
We're not saying that these are bad people. I mean, because they have issues when they drink. But, it's just a little disclaimer I feel I have to throw in there.
Very, very important. No question about it. I think that that makes sense. Rochelle wrote in. Rochelle said, you've done a great job pointing out when political correctness is problematic or stifles free speech. Can you explain how to determine whether something is politically incorrect versus just being rude or offensive? I really thought a lot about this morning, Lewis, about how to answer this. And there's a bunch of ways we could approach it, but I kind of feel like saying, you know it when you see it if you're a reasonable person, right? I mean, that's completely not empirical in any way. It's non-scientific, it's non-specific, and we'll dig into it more specifically. I feel like most reasonable people can distinguish between somebody who is being politically incorrect, but still being a reasonable person in terms of their motivations, and someone who is doing something to either offend or insult.
Well, that's it. It's your motivation, I think, behind whatever you're saying or doing.
But the question is, how would you determine what someone's motivation is? Is it political incorrectness, or is it them being rude?
Maybe I'll agree with you. You know it when you see it. But I guess that could be difficult in certain situations.
It's not topic related for you.
No, it's certainly not topic related at all. I mean, we've had some people on the show who make some pretty outrageous claims, and I don't think that they're being rude necessarily. I think they have backwards thinking, and it's just not politically correct. But it didn't seem to me that some of these nuts were trying to be rude, right?
Yeah, and I was thinking about a really good example where I've had conversations with many different people about, for example, let's just pick one common thing that people say, right? The Hispanic guys hanging around near the Home Depot waiting for day labor jobs, right? I've had conversations where the words are not that different, but with person A, you know that what they're really talking about is the fact that this is a reality, and it's not good that these individuals don't have secure jobs, and that it's not good that it is a particular a group of a particular background that seems to be disproportionately in this situation. And you could talk to person B, who's talking about the same guys at the same Home Depot and saying how that's a bad situation, but it's very clear that they think that Hispanic people are fundamentally lazy in principle, bad people, and don't deserve to work. Now, put aside, if you're lazy, you don't go and wait for someone to hire you to do really hard work at the Home Depot. That we're not even dealing with that today. And it really does feel like you can really talk about almost any topic, or you should be able to. And it's not necessarily rude or offensive. It might just fall under what some people would say is not a politically correct conversation to be having. And I think we should really shy away from not having conversations for that reason. But I do feel like you can tell.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to being rude, to me, being rude seems like, at least in conversation, when I'm being rude to someone, it's just that. I'm being rude to someone. I mean, when I'm talking to you and let's say I decide to say something rude, it would be about someone else. I mean, I'm not really, would you think you're being rude? Like I'm offended because I'm not insulting you. I'm not being rude to you.
Right.
It's kind of a personal, one-on-one thing. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does, although you might be making the comment about the person you're talking to, and it might be politically incorrect or rude.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I really thought about this for a while, and there's no litmus test.
Yeah.
There's no bullet points. What I want to, the thing I want to make very clear is talking about a particular topic should not be written off as rude or offensive merely because of the topic you're talking about. We should be able to have reasonable conversations that are acceptable conversations, really about any topic that is important to whoever it is that wants to bring it up. That doesn't mean that there are horrible people with bad intentions, with the idea of actually discriminating or subjugating or whatever. Of course, all of that stuff exists, but we shouldn't, as a society, say talking about that not acceptable.
Yeah, let's just not be as sensitive or fearful about political correctness. I mean, this sounds like I would encourage people to go back and listen to our interview with Alice Dreger that we had this week. I mean, this is kind of touching on the same thing.
No doubt about it. All right, we have a fantastic bonus show for you today. If you want to watch or listen to the bonus show, it's very easy. You sign up at davidpakman.com/membership and you will get instant access.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.